Hi, I'm Cody and welcome back to another Crafts Right video. Today I'm going to show you how I screwed up making this project at least 10 different times before I was finally able to create this upward spiraling continuous grain pattern hexagonal pencil holder. Stupid long name, kind of a bear to build, but I'm hoping by showing you some of my mistakes it'll make it easier for you if you decide to make this. Let's get to it. For this project I chose walnut, cherry, and maple to give some nice contrast to the pattern. The first thing I did was take my stock to the joiner to get a consistent flat face and square edge. Next I ran the pieces through the planer to get both faces parallel to each other. I chose 1/4 inch thick sides for the pencil holder, so to be as efficient with material as possible, I brought the wood over to the bandsaw to resaw it before I ran them through the planer again to get a consistent thickness. After that it was time to rip the strips. This step requires dead-on accuracy, so test your cuts on some scrap before running your nice hardwoods through the table saw. Here's why. First, let me say I'm no mathematical genius or geometry savant, but I can say I'm a bit embarrassed about how long it took me to get this figured out. My first few tries I was just taking the pattern in Adobe Illustrator and playing around with dimensions until it looked like it would work. It didn't. The easy part was getting the pattern to spiral up around the hexagon, but the hard part was making it match once that pattern traveled all the way around so that there's no obvious start or stop. After too long down the rabbit hole, I finally went into Fusion 360 and started messing around with different dimensions and angles until I stumbled upon the answer. I needed to know the distance from the top right corner of one side of the hexagon to the bisecting angled line that ran from corner to corner of the rectangle-shaped side. Once I had this distance, I could divide it by however many strips I wanted in the pattern, 3 for this one, and that would give me the exact width I needed to cut the strips at. In this case, that was 0.5833 inches wide. It would also tell me the angle I needed to cut the sides of the hexagon at when we get to that point. More on that later. After ripping the strips, I took them over to the miter saw to chop them down to manageable sizes. Make sure you leave some extra length when doing this step because there's almost always some variance in glue up. Now, this is a nifty and simple glue up jig I picked up from Jimmy DeResta's channel. You simply take a square edge scrap, screw it to your workbench, cut another piece of scrap from corner to corner to make a wedge, screw 1/2 down to your workbench, and you can quickly and easily glue up small pieces while keeping them flat. I opted to add some parchment paper underneath to keep the strips from getting stuck to my workbench, and a piece of 3/4 plywood with a sandbag on top did a good job of keeping everything flat while it dried. After 24 hours, it was time for fail number 1. I repaired this real quick with some wood glue for strength and CA glue to hold it together. This way I didn't have to wait for the wood glue to set up before getting back to work. I didn't run this panel through the planer because the only way to get it to fit would have had the grain running perpendicular to the planer blades. This might fly on a helical headed planer, but I didn't want to chance it with straight knives, so I just leveled everything out with a hand plane and sandpaper. After cleaning up the bottom edge to 90 degrees to one side, it was time to slice off the hexagon's sides. This was fail number 2. I didn't cut the panel down to 11 inches as it states in my own plans. This automatically threw the pattern off, but I didn't realize it until right about now. Those plans are available if you'd like, link in the description below. So, rinse and repeat with all the dimensioning and glue up. It also turned out my 21-degree angle wasn't 21 degrees when I was slicing off the sides of the pencil holder, so I made absolutely sure this time around I was cutting the strips at 21 degrees. Turns out I wasn't. Fail number 3. I finally got smart. After 4 different tries of trying to do this and screwing up really nice walnut, cherry, and maple pieces, I finally figured out how to do it correctly. So this was my first attempt. Sucked because the pattern didn't line up the way it's supposed to. Right there. You can see it's totally off. This is supposed to wrap over here. These, when I line them up and run a straight line across, the pattern is all wonky. So I tried it again because I thought that that was off my my miter gauge, and it was. It wasn't 21 degrees. This one, tried it again at 21 degrees, it didn't work. found out that's because there's an error in my table saw. And user error, so that one sucked. This, I glued up some scraps of construction fur because I was going to try it again. Made these too big. So I got smart. I printed off 2 scale little sheets that I could glue onto some scrap plywood so that I can test it and get it correct before I mess up any more beautiful wood. Now this is what I mean by there's a problem with my table saw in essence. Pretty much it's with the miter fence. So by the time that this is locked in at 21 and I get over where I need to make my first cut, this is pretty far out there. And there's wiggle. There's enough wiggle that it throws it off by about 1 degree on each slice. So you add that up over 6 slices, you've got 6 degrees of difference in your piece when it should be dead accurate. So I'm going to use a different method. So this is the plan. This is my tapering straight edge jig, which I know for a fact is parallel to my blade. So what I can do is actually make a little jig of a 21-degree angle right here so that I can just run this along and slice it, and there's no play for that off angle.
I probably could have saved myself a lot of headache and wasted wood if I'd built a miter sled or had a miter sled handy to make these angled cuts, but I didn't.
Rockler, Incra.
Using the printed pattern on wood was a complete success, so I felt confident enough to try it with hardwood one more time. Rinse and repeat all the previous steps. I'll count this as a half fail. Here's why.
Well, it turns out that even though my test piece last night with the plywood and paper on it worked out perfectly, somehow I screwed up this morning just a tiny little bit and it didn't line up perfectly. Like you can see, if I line these up, actually let me put them back in the correct order. You can see it looks okay until I move this one over here where it's going to end up. If I put it flush there, there's a big seam. So what I figured out is if I rearrange them just a little bit, it's not perfect, but instead of there being a huge offset over here, it averages the offset over all of the pieces, which I'm hoping is going to look a little bit better. That way when I cut them all here, they're going to be a hair offset across all of them. I think this is my 7th piece. I'm done messing with it.
Somehow I lost both the footage of beveling the sides of the strips and of accurately cutting the base. You can check out my video on making the plain pencil holder to see how the bevels are cut, and I'll include an in-depth instructional segment on cutting the base in my next video, I promise. So if you would like to see how that's done, make sure you're subscribed and you have the bell icon clicked so you're notified when that comes out. Before glue up, I sanded and finished the inside of the pencil holder with shellac and paste wax. The inside would be nearly impossible to finish once assembled, and the finish helps clean up any glue squeeze out. Glue up is pretty painless with painter's tape on the backside. Simply add glue to the joints, put the base in, and roll it up. After the glue dried, I cleaned up the sides and edges with a belt sander, sanded the holder to 220 with an orbital sander, and then finished the outside with shellac and paste wax. Overall, even though this project turned out to be much harder than I anticipated, I'm really happy with the outcome. If you're looking for a small project to really challenge yourself and work on your precision skills, I couldn't recommend this one more. In my next video, I'll show you how I made a gradient grain hexagon pencil holder with contrasting miter splines. Stay tuned for that. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.